for a lot of you then, this is much of this is going to be old news. I'm gonna basically do a really quick trip through the past 40 so years of work, up until the kind of most recent stuff I'm going to show is from 2019. And whenever I get the chance to do this, it's also an opportunity for me to kind of look back over everything that's gone on and sort of maybe rethink a lot of rethink certain trajectories and rethink certain certain ideas about what I've been doing and what I'm kind of up to. And it certainly, this past year has been a time, I think, for all of us to do that. And it's like it has certainly made me very very skeptical about where we're at with many things in contemporary society, but particularly the art world, and particularly our senses of shared social space, and what that could potentially mean. And so I hope to get the chance to sort of talk about some of that later on. To begin with, though, I'm gonna just quickly take you all through the slide talk. I think it makes the most sense, or the thing that I found with the work is that it's helpful. The more of it you see and get to kind of put together, then the clearer certain things become. So generally, I ask people to hold any sort of complicated questions until the end of the talk, so that we can kind of get through all of it. And since, not to put people on the spot, but since there are folks here who I know have sort of seen me do this a couple of times, I'm really curious to hear from y'all about what y'all are thinking. So we'll get to it. Let's see here. So just moving some stuff around on my desktop that you guys won't see. Is this, let me just make sure, can everybody see everybody is seeing the slideshow at this point?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs. Okay, cool, fantastic. So yeah, I'm gonna start back in like 1979, I guess, early 1980, as an undergrad at Bard College. And Bard, well, basically, for those of you who don't know, I was born in New York City, grew up there, saw a certain amount of the art world of New York in the 70s. Had a bit of a romance with it. But when I started at Bard, I did not start as an art major. Bard's a liberal arts college, and at the time had a very strong film department. And I sort of started out as a film major there. And then at a certain point, it's like switched over to painting, and then switched to sculpture. And the time that I spent in painting, the thinking at Bard was very specific about what constituted a good painting, how what sort of materials made sense to work with. Folks who are my age will remember that we had big debates about abstract painting versus representational painting, about oil paint versus acrylic paint, things now that seem really quaint in terms of their ideological force, but at the time they were super important, or at least we thought they were. And so I was, in that hierarchy. Abstract painting was always better than representational painting. Oil paint was always better than acrylic paint. So I was constantly trying, and large things were always better than small things. So I was constantly trying to make large abstract oil paintings. I could never really get myself to do it. This is a kind of early abstract painting, unfortunately acrylic, unfortunately small. But I started, I was like making these stripe paintings, and then I started cutting them up and reconfiguring them. So this is kind of like bent stripe painting. That then turned into making these paintings out of toilet paper and acrylic. Again, this one's kind of small. Here's a larger one. Toilet paper, faux fur, acrylic paint, and spray paint. And I got done with these, and they were becoming more and more sculptural, and I was just like, well, it doesn't make any sense for these to just be like rectangles. They should just, they're objects. I should just make sculptures out of them. And I also just got very stuck at this time. And I saw, now we're sort of talking about 1981. I actually encountered two things that allowed me to kind of change my thinking about what I was doing. One was the work of Judy Faff, an artist who came and spoke at Bard, who at that point was really starting to think about the idea of installations, about making pieces that filled an entire space. And then the summer of that year, I was living near Times Square. I went to go see a show called the Times Square Show, organized by a artist collective called Collab. And that was a show that took over a derelict massage parlor in the middle of Times Square, and turned the entire building into an exhibition, filled it floor to ceiling, for 4 different floors, with art by a whole host of people, who none of the work was really labeled. So you were kind of walking around in this decrepit building with stuff all over every wall, with no idea of who had made anything. And it was like a thrilling experience to me. It was kind of like an art funhouse. And those two experiences together really shifted my thinking about what I was interested in terms of making work. It was sort of like seeing the walls fill up, and seeing that sense of being kind of immersed within a show really changed the way that I thought about putting shows together. So this is my final project at Bard. It is a abandoned, abandoned. It was a theater building, a black box theater that was no longer going to be in use, and I took it over. I worked in there for like a month, and made this installation in there. And the thing about the installation was that I finally figured out how to approach, instead of trying to make these particular types of paintings that I had been taught were good paintings, I found a way that I could be comfortably making the sorts of things that I made regularly, like lots of small representational narrative things and sort of editing them together into these installations, treating them like individual shots in the film. So I kind of went back to my film, my training as a film major, to make this kind of immersive environment. So I left Bard. I went to Cal Arts for grad school. And the thing about Cal Arts is that at the time, it was as much, it was as doctrinaire as Bard was, but in a very different direction. In the same way that folks wanted you to make these big abstract oil paintings at Bard, at Cal Arts, really, if you were going to demonstrate your mastery of the medium, you would basically put like a typewritten sheet of paper on the outside wall of a gallery, explaining that you were not capitulating to the gallery structure by filling it up with objects. And again, this was a way of working that was sort of goofy and alienating to me. So this is my final show at Cal Arts. It is a mock retrospective. And the thing to know is that I built out these walls and this exhibition structure, not the larger outside walls, but the interior walls. I constructed all of those so that there was a totally different gallery structure. Like when folks left on Friday afternoon, the gallery was empty. When they returned on Monday morning, the gallery was full with this sort of weird fake retrospective exhibition. So I built all of these benches and platforms. That's me. You can tell it's 1984 because I'm wearing a off the shoulder crop top. And the thing that was kind of important about this, that for me in retrospect, the thing that was important is that I recreated my studio space in the gallery, like it was some sort of a goofy shrine, right? And in some ways, it's like a joke about the genius of the artist working in the studio and wanting to be able to see that environment. On the other hand, it does go to a question that I've continually tried to think about in relationship to what I do, which is, the studio in some ways stands in opposition to the gallery. The studio is the place where work is made. The gallery is the place where work is kind of encountered and supposedly consumed. And I'm very I'm always wondering what happens when we jumble those categories. How can we turn the gallery space into the space of production, the space of the space of making work? And so that's in some ways what's going on. The dimmest echo of it in these early installations. So finished Cal Arts, and then moved up to the Bay Area. And a year after being out of school, I was included in an exhibition at a space called New Langton Arts. Hi, Rennie. I saw you were here, and put up an installation. Was asked to be included in their 10th anniversary show, and for my presence in that show, I made an installation, and I'm gonna. This is the only picture I'm showing of it, in part because visually it looked a lot like the installation at Bard, and this wall that's here is a sort of wheat pasted wall that included my drawings and plans for the installation. So it's this sort of like bulletin board wall that's not unlike the studio, that was down in the Cal Arts installation. But when I got done with this show, I was very frustrated with the sort of ephemerality of all of the rest of the stuff that was in the show. And it also felt to me like a kind of gesture that was a repetition of things that I already knew and had kind of worked out. And so I took some time to rethink the way that I was working. It was frustrating to me that that for folks who were not there at this exhibition, there really wasn't much to look at afterwards. And so the next show, I decided to give myself some assignments for the next body of work. And those assignments were that the things had to be self-contained, individual objects that that were not going to be so ephemeral that I was going to be willing to spend time with over, over however long. And that resulted in this body of work from 1986 to 87, shown at an exhibition space south of Market called Media. Media was an artist bookstore and an exhibition space run by Patricia Davidson. So we'll go through these kind of quickly.
Hi.
Whoops. Whoa, how did that happen? Sorry. Okay. Sorry, folks. That was a little weird. Sorry, my finger slipped there. Just a sec. Nope. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second and get back on track. Sorry.
Sounds good.
Okay. There we go. a piece called Correction. So this is a piece called 500 Kisses. I basically printed 2 sets of cards. One said final on one side and the other said fluid on the other. One said safe on one side and seen on the other. At the beginning of the show, I pitched half of the cards towards the hat there, and then the rest were left for viewers to pitch during the course of the show. So basically what was going on here is that I was going around to a lot of thrift stores, sort of finding stuff and gradually kind of reworking it and sort of combining it into these assemblages. And I got done with that body of work, and again, it resolved some questions and then raised some others. I basically, when I'm working, one of the things that I try to do is, if there is something that is a kind of successful solution or strength in the work, I try to do 2 things in relationship to that. I try to make some work that does not rely on that successful solution, so that it doesn't become a kind of crutch. And similarly, alternately, I try to look at what's going on there and do kind of a deeper dive into it. So one of the things that was going on in this work was, I was taking, a kind of evocative object, putting a kind of loaded phrase on it, and boom, you had art. And I began to ask myself, the role of the sort of language in those pieces, and started going like, okay, well, the truth is that whenever we encounter an object, we encounter it with language. It's not, we're constantly naming things in our head. So I don't necessarily need to stick the word on the thing in order for us to really be thinking about it. So that led to a bunch of pieces that were about the sort of collision between what you saw and what you learned when you learned what the things were. So this is water, wine, vinegar, piss. And then I started to go like, okay, well, what happens if we just work directly with language? So I started making these kind of sign paintings. This is a piece called March. What's going on here is that I ate an apple each day of the month of March 1987. And then I preserved the core of the apple in vodka and tagged it with the date and put it in these jars. So that's what you're seeing here. I guess I could, I maybe just quickly could also say about this. The other question I was sort of posing I've tried to pose to myself over and over again is, you know, what happens when we take the stuff that we encounter outside of the exhibition space and bring it into the exhibition space? Media was located a couple of blocks away from the bar, the Stud. And so this is the Stud's flag that hung outside the bar, kind of the same typography with the letters rearranged. I then began to I then began to look at the work and go like, okay, well, this kind of antique look that all the work has, it's kind of relying on that kind of lushness and kind of weathered look. So what happens if I start making some things that basically look contemporary, that look brand new, that don't look like they were pulled out of a thrift store? A piece called Restraint Chair. piece called Flush. And then that meant moving the sign paintings onto these chalkboards. Um, and so this is a piece with both of these chalkboards contain different translations of the same passage from Leopold von Sacher-Masoch's book, Venus in Furs. And the thing that was interesting to me here was the way that there's a sort of third painting that hovers in between the two descriptions. It's kind of made up of elements of the two descriptions that your mind is making, but that isn't, that doesn't necessarily exist in the text or anywhere else. Piece called The Many Faces of Addiction. This is from a pamphlet that I found on the street in San Francisco. Oscar Wilde's initials in neon. So having made these things that were not reliant on a kind of antique look, I then wanted to do some investigating of a particular time period. Instead of it being a sort of vague, Victorian look, what happens if it was really looking at the 19th century? So this led to the first of a series of pieces that were installations based on specific texts. This is called the Schreber Suite. It is an installation at the University Art Museum in Berkeley, in their old location, based on Daniel Paul Schreber's book, Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. And for this show, there were a number of things that happened. I made new objects based on Schreber's descriptions of his hallucinations. I also curated a selection of works from the museum's permanent collection that were contemporaneous with Schreber's book. And then I also dispersed works throughout the museum, primarily in the bathrooms. So the idea was to kind of use, again, the exhibition situation as a way of interrogating all of the parts of how this particular text could have meaning and be reactivated. One of the things that started happening was with these pieces, now we're about like 89, was thinking about providing people with all of the materials that they needed to perform an action. So one thing that's consistently been interesting to me about sculpture is, how do you insert yourself into it? And so that sort of led to these kind of kit pieces. I think it's also probably pretty clear that at this point we really are at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and the sense of bodily distress and anxiety about care and health is also really kind of permeating a lot of these works. It's a piece called Schatzman Hallucination Guide. Valerie Solanas' Scum Manifesto. Eventually I moved from silk screening on the chalkboards to silk screening directly on the wall, and then leaving the silk screen next to the text. So you kind of have the text and then the thing that gave you the text. Again, asking this question about like, how is meaning made? Project for a West Coast, or basically Bay Area, art magazine, Shift, founded by Anne McDonald. And so you can see at this point that the work has become more and more elaborately fabricated, and I started to miss the experience of just going and shopping in thrift stores again. So I started making these pieces, which are accumulations of mass market paperbacks. Um, I would I would basically go into thrift stores and pull these all at one go. So they were all very direct. I kind of would like find the group of books that went together, and then made these like form-fitting plexiglass boxes for them. So just quickly, this is Larry Kramer's book, Faggots, The Hobbit, The Hobbit, The Hobbit, Faggots again. So this one's Faggots and Hobbits. This is the Christine Jorgensen story, the Iliad, the James Coco Diet, The Trouble with Tribbles, the Christine Jorgensen story. So The Exorcist, The Omen 2, The Exorcist, The Omen 2, The Exorcist, the complete Jacqueline Suzanne library. And this just gives you a quick idea of how they were sort of put together. And again, this is asking the question like, okay, here's the stuff that is around me in my day-to-day life. Why is that not in the work? Why not include that in the work? And you know, these were all books that friends of mine and I had read, and yet when it came time to talk about them, you know, when it came time to talk about what we were reading in the art context, we were always talking about theory, right? It was never about the stuff that had also been going on with us that was a more mundane thing. Eventually what happened with these is that I stopped making the boxes for them and just started rearranging the paperback book sections of thrift stores. So they became these pieces that were only there for the people who came after me in the thrift store and would sort of dissipate as you know, as more people bought books and other books got stocked. This is a project for Art Against AIDS on the Road, a project from 1989, bus shelter across the street from San Francisco City Hall. Another project for Art Against AIDS. This is head hog tie. So now we're around 1990. Canvas restraint. Piece called Feeder. Piece called Hysterical Arrangement. It's a still from a video called Negative Bunny. This is a piece called Magic. This is Wayland Flowers' puppet Madam, with this sort of traveling case and sort of flower memorial that I built for her. Series of these bouquet pieces that are bent willow letters and artificial flowers. Now we're around 93, 92, 93. Piece called Saved and Damned. Homunculus. This piece was made for a residency in London in 1992. And just quickly, what's going on here is that at the beginning of the show, the exhibition, all of these spikes were empty. You can see a table over here. That table has a mold for these heads and a hot plate and cook pot. Basically, what happened here is during the course of the day when the exhibition was open, I was in the space melting down wax and chocolate and casting these heads. And then as they would come out of the mold, I would mount them on these spikes. Piece called Flayed, Heavenly Bunny Suit, The Little One, this is 93 now. This is Equipment for a Shameful Epic. It's basically all the props, costumes, and other items that you need to stage a production of this this script that's here on the side. The script is one that I wrote that's a combination of the Pinocchio story and the Watergate transcripts. A piece called Blind. This was shown at Gallery Mincher Wilcox in San Francisco. And what happened here was that in the overall show, people could order items from a catalog, and the show itself consisted of all the workstations that were necessary to make the items. So as an item was ordered during the run of the show, I would make it during the exhibition hours. And then it would be on display until the end of the show. People could pick them up. What happened here is that if you ordered this piece, you would get an hour of my time in this suit, wearing this blindfold and gag, and sort of chained up in this bower structure here. And we would videotape the hour, and then you would get the videotape. A couple of years later, and this is the second of these suite installations. This is the Philosopher's Suite. The text that it's working with is the Marquis de Sade's Philosophy in the Bedroom. And basically what's happening here is a whole series of performances of the text itself. So this is the stage for a marionette production of the text. And here's a couple of the marionettes. Again, this is a situation that while the show was running, I had set up a small studio space in the exhibition space and was making things during the run of the show. This is that same year, 1994, at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Again, it's the two texts that I'm working with here are Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man and the play Harvey. And what's going on here is that prior to the opening of the show, I was wearing a costume and had this whole sort of kit that I was carrying around to various objects in the museum's collection. And basically, I was making drawings and then using those drawings to make surrogate versions of those objects, and then inserting them in this altar structure here. On the back wall was a selection of like a small curated exhibition based on a keyword search for the word rabbit for the Baltimore Museum's collection. What's happening on this video screen here is my activity going around the museum in the outfit, making the drawings, recorded on the museum's security cameras. Year later, this is a show at a gallery in Los Angeles. Just to clarify for folks, this thing here is the tallest thing in the space, and it's about 14 inches tall. So the whole show is very, very low to the ground. Piece called One Down. Piece called Colder and Colder. The next year, there's sort of series of works based on this, using this cutout of Pinocchio. Around this time, I was commissioned to execute a piece for what was then the new main branch of the San Francisco Public Library. Y'all can go see it. It's a piece called Constellation. It's basically a collection of local of authors' names that were that are in the collection of the library, displayed, illuminated on this wall around with the central staircase wrapping around it. The next year, again in Los Angeles, a piece called Hair Hole. A performance called Bunny Slumber from this year. One of the things that happened at this point is that I returned to drawing in a really big way. And that's something that sort of remained consistent all the way through. Images from a commissioned performance for the Brooklyn Academy of Music. I'm working with my collaborators Ishmael Houston Jones, Patricia Hoffbauer, and then Chris Cochran, who you can't see, on a show called Hair Follies, which is a sort of collaged script put together out of a bunch of different sources. I wrote the script, designed the sets and costumes, and performed. One of the things, again, in terms of giving myself assignments, in terms of work, this is a couple of images from a show where basically I gave myself an assignment to make a piece a day for the month of April. So this is called April Hair. This is the piece from the 1st of April. It's called Clown White Target. Piece called Double Surrender. Erased Space Jam Bootleg. Gray rabbit made as tall as me by stretching its neck. Shit molding kit. And the last piece in the show is burnt cork target. From the next year, a piece called Feeder 2, steel and gingerbread, about 7 feet by 7 feet by 10 feet. That was shown alongside this video called Gorge, where I am being fed for an hour. That then turned into a performance that I've done on numerous occasions, where I'm seated in front of a table of food and the audience feeds me for an hour. Here's the most recent version of that at a play party in New York around my 60th birthday. A piece called Steel Cage Match. Piece called Wrong Banyan. Some larger charcoal drawings. A piece called Server, Angel Food Cake, and Tar. The suit is part of this video installation called Starting Over. This is a piece called Ruins of a Sensibility. It is my vinyl record collection with this painting on the back wall and this DJ setup. The painting is one that I made with my dad when I was 4, sort of one of my earliest memories. Anytime that the show is up, anytime that the piece is shown, people can sign up to DJ with the records. So the idea of the, again, this is the sense of how do we make the exhibition space a space of production. Piece called Root. The large one, 16-foot tall bunny suit. Gorge lunchbox. Some more of these drawings. A piece called Endless Comfort. A piece called Companion. Around this time, I also, again, kind of questioning this idea of like, what good is the exhibition space for, or how to really like rethink my relationship with making things. I started making this series of pieces where I would basically find stuff on the street, I would draw on it and then put it back where I had found it. With a little phrase on the back of it. So the piece, like the book pieces in the thrift stores, these were basically gifts for whoever would find them next. At the same time, I was also making things out of stuff that I was finding on the streets on my sort of daily walks. So this is a necklace made with 31 objects, one for each day of October, that I found when I was out walking my dog. Again, another project for the streets. This is a sticker project for visual aids, encouraging people to record their experiences of love and affection on the streets of New York. And here's some close-ups of these pieces of found stuff from the streets. So in a weird way, this is kind of getting back to abstract sculpture, although some of it is a bit more narrative. That led to making some shows where I brought all of the materials to the space and did not really have finished pieces, just kind of had components, and then worked over the course of the installation to create the pieces. So these are at Paula Anglem Gallery in San Francisco. They're called Sterling Improvisations. I live on Sterling Street. This is basically stuff that I found around the street. Um, that led to a much larger project at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts called Free Love Toolbox that sort of combined a lot of these ideas that kind of how to make the exhibition space a space of production, but also a space of memory, and how to help Yerba Buena deal with its history of its location, and its location south of Market, and its history as part of a development that in some ways displaced San Francisco's early S&M community. This is the name comes from the Toolbox, which is San Francisco's first leather bar, was located a few blocks from where Yerba Buena currently exists. This is a reproduction of the mural that was inside the Toolbox, and which was sort of famously featured in Life magazine in 1963, and sort of one of an article called "The Homosexual in America" that looked at 3 different cities, and it is the first international magazine that featured actual leathermen in it. So we had a lot of different areas and activities set up in the exhibition space. We again had the record collection, and it also was a we had a series of events looking at the queer punk scene of the early 90s, looking at other parts of South of Market life, talks from people talking about leather history. A bunch of you were there. And this is a performance with my collaborator, Lolita Wolf, where she is inserting surgical staples that are connected to threads and then ribbons on my arms and then across my back. And then those ribbons are unfurled and attached to the banner at the back. And I perform as a kind of reverse marionette. Here's the next year. Another one of these improvised shows, this time in New York at Matthew Marks Gallery. performance as Pinky the Elephant at a queer queer pop-up space called the Forest of the Future. Another installation, hybridized curatorial project for the International Center of Photography for their triennial. So again, I was including works from their collection, and then looking at the spaces that don't normally get treated as art spaces in the museum. So the storage spaces, the bathrooms, and the cafe. As part of this show on the weekends, I went out and sort of wandered the streets of Times Square, which is basically where ICP was located, as this character, Victoria Spector, going around revisiting the sites of porn theaters and bookstores that I had gone to in my teen years, which no longer existed after the sort of cleanup of Times Square. This is a little flyer that I would hand out if people were asking me questions. The QR code led to a website that collected images and other stuff related to the show. And then you know, some more digital drawings. They ended up becoming much more about me as this kind of cartoon figure. That we then turned into this character, this sort of self-portrait doll called Cuddle Buddy. This is a project with an artist named Liz Collins, a collaborative project called Stab. And then this is a project for 500 Cap Street, David Ireland's former house. I was lucky enough to be asked to execute a project there. This is a piece called Workroom. So again, thinking about like, what are the spaces of production? What are the spaces of pleasure? What are we making when we're making art? This is the view from the outside in the garage. And then when you go around around the wall there's an entrance. Here's what's happening back behind that barrier. And then for the past 5 or so years, I've been making drawings daily with a couple of breaks, but relatively consistently. So they're kind of wide ranging. This was made right before the 2016 election. And then here's a piece for the new museum's Trigger. It's their exhibition looking at gender. So during the course of the show, I would come into the space and perform wearing this fursuit as my persona Nomen. And I had this tray of pins. People were encouraged to pick out a pin, tell a secret to the pin, and then pin the ribbon back onto me. back onto Gnomon. And so by the end of the show, the suit is covered with all of these secrets. And then another sort of found object piece from that time. And then this is the most recent show, called Nayland Blake's Opening. It opened right around the same time as my retrospective, which is called No Wrong Holes. So I'm just gonna quickly take you through. The show had 4 of these pieces called Vanities, piece called Love Station. Basically, this up here is a bronze cast of a candle that my parents gave me when I was like 10. And you can see other reproductions of that candle in the show. And then these are blown glass insertables made by a glassmaker called Queerly Made. Piece called Dream Body. Here's the other the piece containing 60 reproductions of that love candle. Some mirror plexiglass mirror paintings, and a piece called Pink Posture. And that is everything.
Thank you, Nayland.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
That was a lot. It's lovely.
It's a whole lot of stuff. But you know, I think why not?
A lot to digest. Thank
Yeah,
you so
exactly.
much, for walking us through like that very large series of work. It's really amazing. Maybe Nayland, would you take questions?
Sure.
We can open it up for questions. So if the audience want to like ask questions, to please post in the chat, or I don't think we can see on the screen everybody all at once, so maybe it would be good.
I think it's probably better if people post in the chat.
Yeah. And
I will say that I mean, you know, I think one of the things that's well, I'm curious to hear what y'all think. I know there's some smart folks in the room, so.
I think everybody's posing to digest all all the work, because there's a lot.
Yeah, either that or they've taken the opportunity for a short nap, which is equally good at this moment. Whatever sort of self-care you need, I support it. I do think that one of the things that I come back around to at this point, and particularly this year, is like, you know, I'm looking at who's here, and so many of us have, you know, worked in organizations, have really seen a whole you know, panoply of history of you know, sort of the ups and downs of various communities and art scenes over the past, you know, 40 some odd years. How are y'all doing? How are people holding up in there? It's like, I will tell you that I have found it pretty rough.
There is a question in the chat.
Yep. I don't know if folks who are on the phone probably can't see the chat, so I'll read it out. Hagen is asking, thank you, Nayland. I was wondering if you could speak more to the exhibitions at Media, New Langton Arts, and if you could share your experience making at 500 Cap Street. Sure. You know, I mean, since 1991, may seem kind of tangential, but since 1991, I've taught at a whole variety of institutions, and for the past 18 years, I've run a graduate program, and so often, like, talking to students, they are mystified and anxious about having an art career, about being able to make, make something and sustain that activity. And one of the things that I try to let them know is that, I owe my entire career to nonprofit art spaces and to folks who are my friends. Patty, who opened Media, was my roommate, right? The first show I got in Los Angeles was from somebody who was running the bookstore at Lace, a nonprofit space down there, who was a classmate of mine at Cal Arts. And so I really think it's super important. And these are the sorts of histories that get lost, and that the large scale commercial art world has a real interest in obscuring, and they are the histories of people like coming together to make small opportunities for each other. The fact that Langton not only gave me my first show, but also, Rennie and Judy asked me to serve on the board of that organization, allowed me to understand governance, like how nonprofits work and what nonprofit governance is. And that was immensely important. And then I was an employee of that organization. I was on staff there. And those understandings of how all of that occurs is hugely important for the rest of my career. Like, the years I worked at ICP, it was like, this is another artist-founded nonprofit that is the same generation as New Langton Arts is. Looking at Yerba Buena versus SF MoMA, right? Yerba Buena I was on the artist advisory board at Yerba Buena, and it was quite important that the mission of that organization was about providing a local voice, a voice that was grounded in San Francisco, that was not just a recapitulation of a kind of, transnational idea of what art making was. And so I think, like, one of the things that we're seeing now in the museum world is the crisis of people being called to account for a kind of, unthinking transnationalism that is not grounded in local experience. And I'm really interested in people being able to rethink that, to really rethink what a museum means. And because it's been really clear, like this is the thing, right? We're after 4 years of Trump and a year of the pandemic, what we have seen is the metastasation of income inequality and a bunch of billionaires going like, forget it, we're just going to go to Mars. Like we don't want to stick around to have to fight you for resources, right? And it's fine with us if the art world is just auctions and art fairs, because that's where we can do our shopping online and we don't have to deal with anybody else. And we can like stick this stuff, in our vaults and let it accrue value over time. I think that the corrective to that is in the modest and the local. So those shows, were incredibly important to me, and just as ways of learning about what an artist's career could be. And that's why I was so excited to be able to work at Cap Street, right? To be able to work on that project. It's embarrassing to me how few people know about David Ireland's work. When you look at people and the way in which people think about what a local artist is, right? There's that ability to think about something in sight, right, is immensely important. And the fact that it's like that thing, that building is there and isn't anywhere else, isn't in New York, isn't it, like that's a reason to go to the Bay Area, right? So it was really, I felt really honored to be able to make something, for that space. My perversity led me to make glory holes for that space. But in part because it's like, I'm also want us to ask the question of, why do we imagine that if something comes from our bodies, it's less than something that comes from our minds? So in a way, all of my work is about embodiment. Mm-hmm. It is about trying to think about our own physicality, and to do that without shame, right? That's why the retrospective is called No Wrong Holes. It's our bodies are like weird collections of bumps and openings, and they're all equally good. So that, so that's the other piece of that. Let's see.
Nayland. I think the next, thank you, Nayland, and thank you, Hagen, for the question. The next one we have is by Dexter Wu. Dexter is asking, why did you choose to dress up in a rabbit suit? If you could elaborate more on that.
Well, there's the short answer is that I was doing a performance, and I had been doing a lot of performances in the late 80s wearing like prom dresses, and guys in thrift store prom dresses was getting kind of played out by the end of the 90s, and I was down in LA doing this performance, and I see you laughing, Jennifer. I still have a Jessica McClintock somewhere in one of my closets. but I was doing this performance down in LA, and they were all these collage texts I was putting together, and the collage text for that one revolved around magic and witches. And I was like, I need a new costume for this. I was walking past a magic store on Hollywood Boulevard and saw this bunny costume and was like, oh, that may well, I'll do that. I'll do the bunny. And then I started asking myself the question of like, why did that come to me? And started making some more work around that image. And that then opened up into a series of investigations around gender, around race, you know, a whole bunch of different things. So that's the short answer for how it showed up.
Thank you, Nayland. Next is Jennifer.
Yeah, with a verbal question.
Yes.
That okay? Yeah, it's just it's not fully formulated, but basically I was thinking about you know, you have all these kind of theatrical sets and sort of proposals for positions of the body, and then you're talking about embodiment is really interesting. So I'm wondering about the role of theatricality and performing the role of the artist in these pieces, you know, performing the studio relationship to what you just said about embodiment, because it feels like a little bit like the rabbit being like a magician's prop. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, a whole batch of work that is not in this presentation but is immensely important to me is stuff that has gone on that I have participated in the kink and S&M community. And you know, there have been those things in the work since the beginning, right? There has been the use of chains or the use of things like restraints. To me, I'm constantly asking myself the question of like, if I find a thing hot, then why do I find it hot, right? It is interrogating my own subjectivity in that sense. And so one of the things I think is that, you know, an interest in bondage is in some ways an interest in sculpture, right? The bondage equipment is like the armature for a sculpture. It's about eroticizing a position. And so it's really interesting to me when I try to always leave a space in the sculpture for us to project ourselves into, you know, to sort of mentally try it on. And then I think that, you know, role play is the place where embodiment meets a kind of subjectivity, right? That it's about like, I want to have this sensation, and then why does that need to happen within this context, right? It's not, it's one thing to be a person who maybe enjoys pain. It's another thing is to be a person who's willing to take pain from a particular person or in a particular context. And that stuff isn't presented here in order because I take seriously the idea in kink that if you don't bring food, you don't get to eat, right? To me, S&M performance is the performance where the audience is coextensive with the cast and the director, right? So it's like everybody's there, everybody who is there in the performance is putting it on for each other. And it's not, and even if you're there as a voyeur with consent in that situation, you are enacting a role. You're not somebody who just wandered by. And to me, that's a powerful cultural idea, as opposed to the contemporary art idea, which is that you leave something in a space and it's supposed to operate the same for anybody who wanders by at any time. And the thing is like mobile and wanders from space to space, from gallery to house to museum, and is supposed to sort of have the same effect, even though there's no way of anticipating who's encountering it, right? So it's about trying to make something that is a counteractive to that sort of generalized idea of what a cultural interaction is.
Thank you, Nayland, and thank you, Jennifer, for your question.
Sure.
Next, we have a response by Rennie. Rennie, would you like to add to it or ask? Rennie are very.
It's a good one, Rennie.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. I just signed a 5-year contract, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. You know, I mean, to be blunt about it, one of the things that's very interesting at this moment is, I'm sure it's happened at SFAI, every single institution that I have been involved with in the past year to 2 years has been involved in a DEI initiative, right? Diversity, inclusion. I'm forgetting what the E is.
Equity.
Equity. Thank you. And what's going on there is that people are trying to regain power that was stripped away from them in the first round of the culture wars in the 80s. The defunding of nonprofit arts organizations went hand in hand with the defunding of mental health, initiatives, went hand in hand with the privatization of development and banking, went hand in hand. All of these were ways, of stopping marginalized people from having access to power, whether or not that was financial power or cultural power. And so what happened in the wake of that was that institutions became, reliant on corporate support and became in some ways slaves to a kind of class, exclusionary power. And people are overwhelmed by it, right? Folks who are, folks who are trying to work in these worlds of the nonprofit arts have been shown the way that they're brought in as kind of window dressing in institutions without actually being given decision-making power. And so at all of these institutions that I see, like all of these different museums, all of these smaller arts institutions, all of these other nonprofits, I see people struggling to try to engage with that, in part because we've had 4 years of an administration where that was no longer subtle, where that was just explicit, where it's like, we will just, openly sort of declare war, right? And so I remain hopeful for artists run nonprofits, but I think they really have to rethink what it is that they're doing and who they are for. And that in some ways the best role for them can be to give birth to a different organization rather than simply sort of continue. So I think it's a really tough time, but I think it's also worth trying to connect the dots for people who don't really have a firm grasp on the history of it. Yeah.
Okay, Nayland, thank you so much. We're going to take 2 more questions and we need to wrap it up. Also, we want to be mindful of time. So there's a question by Liane. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name not right. And then there's a question by John DeFazio.
Okay.
Liane, would you like to ask your question, or shall I? Maybe I'll read it. I wanted to ask, Nayland, what beautiful work. I'm so enamored by you. I wanted to ask the relationship between staging, performance, and painting for you. It seems you started with painting, then taking over a theater space, performance, and then sculptural installations. How do you see these devices relate to your work?
Well, let me just say that I still make paintings on occasion, and I kind of I mean, maybe this is the thing, like folks who were raised Catholic have like a really specific set of rules about things like that they can either rebel against or like capitulate towards. You know, I was raised Episcopalian, so we're all like, you know, for that stuff, I don't really have guilt. I'm like, we're all okay. We're very bland as a as a branch of Christianity, but I did get raised with kind of strict rules about painting, and there are certain, like there are certain things that I believe make a good painting, and so when I'm making a painting, I'm still grappling with those rules. And so, you know, the other stuff I don't have the same kind of rule set about. I can be more of a fan of it and be more excited about trying to bring things together. Theater has always been really important to me. One of the most important artists to me is the theater artist Richard Foreman, whose work I saw for years and years and was, you know, really bowled over by. But you know, it's I think the important thing, and maybe this is helpful for sort of younger folks, is to not be afraid to claim a lot of territory. The most pushback I ever got about a show was when I put up a show of stripe paintings at Jack Hanley's gallery in like, it must have been like 95, and people were like outraged. They thought I was like making fun of painting. I was like, no, I'm trying to actually make good stripe paintings. like I'm really trying to do it. But people thought it was like some weird cynical thing, you know. But at the opening of that show, I remember a young person came up to me and was like, I didn't know that you could do this. And I was like, yeah, well, I painted off and on. And they were like, no, I didn't know that you could put up a show like this given your other shows. And I think that's the thing, right? We should all be willing to expand, to take up the entire universe. We should all be as big as we need to be. We don't need to keep ourselves small for each other. Like when I see somebody diminish themselves, it doesn't help me. It's actually painful to see that.
Okay, thank you, Nayland, and thank you, Liane, for the question. Our last question for today is by John DeFazio. John?
Hi, Nayland, it's good to see you.
Hi, John.
Have you gone through thrift stores in New York? Or is there a difference between country thrift stores in Bard versus the urban thrift stores?
We are so shopped out that like it is I mean, aside from the fact that like Gap t-shirts from 1991 are vintage, like for real, that's the definition of that term. But it's also, yeah, it's like New York is really shitty for thrift stores at this point. There are, you know, up around Bard, it's all like New Yorkers who moved upstate. So there's some amazing antique shops, but they're run by like really amazing people who have a really good eye, who pick stuff out, and it's not like you're discovering anything. So I think it's also the thing. I think that kitsch is really hard at the present moment because we have a visual sensorium in the internet that doesn't allow us to ever forget anything. So I think a big part of like the excitement of thrifting, like in the way that I remember doing, like when like you and I would do it, it's like you would find this thing and you'd be like, oh my God, I haven't thought about this in ages. And like kind of reinvesting in it. And now nothing goes away. It's all still like here. You know, we're stuck in this eternal visual present.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't mean for this to be like so distressing. I'm actually a very optimistic person.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nayland. Thank you, John DeFazio, for your question. And thank you, Nayland, so much for your generosity and for sharing, your incredible work. It's been really a pleasure to know more about it. And we cannot thank you enough. So
yeah, thank you, Nayland.
It's lovely to see everybody. I'm so glad to see so many pals.
Yay!
Yay!
And you have lots of beautiful messages in the chat. I'm gonna save it and send it to you as well.
Oh, yay. Okay, thank you.